Hey everyone, my name is Joe and I hope you're well. Today I want to talk about import versus use in Sass. I've seen a couple things on Reddit recently where people are asking the question, why do I want to use? Import still works, it seems to be better, and I don't understand why I would want to do this. And it also seems like I need to switch over to this because the Sass team is going to be getting rid of import, maybe. So lots of questions about it, and I want to talk about the differences. I've also seen some people say import is by far better, and I think that is actually the opposite. So I want to talk about why I think it's better to use, why it's still around, and what I think is going to be happening with it. All right, so let's just jump right into this. Starting with, I think the first place is, why do we have these two syntaxes? Well, import was the first. It's been there. It works basically exactly like a copy and paste would from one file to another. This is the way that CSS imports work. The nice thing about Sass imports is that it lets you import a partial. It doesn't have to be a URL. It's done obviously it's done pre on the CSS side, so everything just gets copy and pasted right into the file, and then you're only serving out one file. So you can kind of create these modules. You can have private, or not private. You can have partial Sass files that will just get stuck right into the main file, and it just makes your life a whole lot easier when you're trying to manage a large code base or even a small code base. It just kind of helps you organize things in a nice way. That's great, but it has a lot of problems. And because of some of these problems, the Sass team, I believe, created use to tackle a lot of these issues. And I think, and I don't have any proof of this, but I think that the Sass team is trying to get away from sorry to keep using the same words, but I think they're trying to get away from using anything that may already exist inside of CSS, because I think that's where things start to get a little bit confusing. So import statements exist in CSS. So the idea that this also now just works inside of Sass, I feel like that is a little bit of a tricky thing, because then somebody who is coming from Sass and dropping these things into normal CSS one day for whatever reason, they may not understand the differences between certain pieces of code in one environment versus the other. And I mean, honestly, sometimes I've gotten confused too. You didn't realize you're in a CSS file and you're like, why is this doing this weirdly? Or why is this not working the way you're, and then you're like, oh crap, this is just a CSS file. This isn't Sass, or vice versa. So it does happen. I think, again, that might be even just a secondary reason. The main reason, I believe, is just that use is a way better statement, a way better function. I think they're functions. I don't know what way better at rule to use. It's really annoying to keep saying use over and over again, so sorry if I'm driving anybody bonkers with this. Let's look at this, though, and see now. Oh, so wait, let me answer that question. Make sure I'm answering the question correctly. Import versus use. Import was the original thing. The team has since realized there probably needs to be something better, because we have things that we want to do that we can't do with imports, that we maybe shouldn't shoehorn into imports at this point, like namespacing. So let's create a new thing called use, and eventually let's get rid of these imports from the code base. So at some point in the future, they are probably going to remove @import from future versions of Sass. Maybe. I don't know if they're really going to remove it. There is a migration tool that they've created. I've never played with it, but Sass is really big in terms of its user base. Like, it's got a lot of people using this. So will they really, really remove a feature? I don't know. It's dangerous to remove things from even later versions of code, because you're going to break backwards compatibility. So if they do decide to actually remove import, you're going to have a situation where maybe version 4 of Dart Sass doesn't support it. And then people will be stuck on older versions of Sass because their code bases are using import statements. So I don't know if they're really going to remove it. They may just, again, as I think it's been a while now that they've just been saying, don't use import, use. So will they remove it in a future version? They might. I don't know how realistic that is. But I would suggest to anyone at this point in time, if you can, start, like, dump import. Don't use it, use. Okay. Now that I've said the word use 600,000 times, I think I have sufficiently driven myself crazy with it. Let's talk about import and what it actually does. I said before, it's a copy and paste. So I want to look at this code real quick and see where some pitfalls can come into play. I have these 2 statements up here: import boxes, import stacks, and then I have a color and a body that is using this color. So if this were a multiple choice test that I was giving to some of my students, I would ask the question, what color is the background on here right now? And if this is all you saw, there would have to be an answer. It would probably be something like A, I don't know, B, green, C, purple, D, none of the above. Like, that would probably be my like questions or my answers for this. And really, or I guess there'd be another one in there somewhere that would say, I can't exactly answer this without knowing what's inside of import boxes and stacks. That could be a correct answer too. So by just looking at this code and nothing else, you would have to assume that the color is going to be green. That may not necessarily be true, but lacking any kind of other way of looking into these boxes or stacks, you have to say that it's green. Why? Because color is not defined anywhere inside of here, right? So color is being used right here. And unless it's defined somewhere else, the default is going to be set to green. So right now, when it goes to render, when the compiler runs, it would say, oh, okay, I'm using color. There's nothing set on color, but I have a default value, so I'm going to set that to green. So that's what it would do. However, that's not actually what is here, what this will be rendered, because if we take a look inside of boxes, we see that I do have a color set. I have the color set to blue. So boxes right here is setting it to blue, but this is global. So now it's going to be set to blue right inside of here. So if I just put this here, we now have color equals blue coming out of here. All of this stuff is global. This is a global variable. This is a global import. So as of right now, color is blue. Now that's inside of boxes. Inside of stack, color gets changed to red, and then it's used inside of here. So that means color coming out of here is red, which means when we get into this thing right here, color is now equal to red. And just in case I can prove it, I'm going to just compile just the Sass. Let's look at out.css, and you can see right here, box is blue, stacks red, background for the body is red. So this is just something you have to keep in mind when you're working with Sass and imports, that the order of things is going to be an issue, right? If you flip these 2 around and we compile it again, you're going to see that inside of out, the color is now blue because the last thing wins. So the last variable set wins, and that's it. And the variable is set at this point, which is why the default color is not being used. So this default kind of just says, okay, this isn't the real color. This isn't what I want to actually set here. This is what I want to set in the absence of any other variable being set. So imports, the ordering of these things can actually have a big change on what you're expecting the outcome to be here, right? Now, if I needed to use green here and I don't want it to be a default value, I could just set it like this. And if I compile it out again, you'll see that now it is green. But if you didn't want to do that for some reason, or if you can't do this for some reason, you're now dependent on the order of your imports to have this color being set. And as you can see, it's all global. So it's all just taking up the same namespace. Everything is just, I used a very generic value here, or a very generic variable name here. And that just is, being overridden by import statements, by stuff that's in import statements, or it's being taken over by those things. So if this was code that was not under my control, let's say this was code coming from a framework of some sort that is just living out in the wild, I may be dependent on what they are producing in order to style this. So I might actually have to say, well, I can't use color, even though that's technically the right name. I have to make this, my color. And then I can set it to, green by default or whatever, right? Again, this is a very contrived example, and I know you're probably sitting there saying, yeah, but I mean, you can just set it, right? You don't have to use this default. Again, very contrived, just to show that imports are all in the same namespace, are all global, and they can overwrite your things. You can write code that will absolutely overwrite other code. And that can be a bit of a problem. Okay, so that's one issue that we have here. The other one is that imports are really just dumb copy and pastes. So you run into an issue where if you did something like this, if I could type, you are now going to see, if I compile this out again, that I have two stacks. Stack, stack, and then background. So why do I have two stacks? Because I've imported twice. And you might be saying at first, how often does this happen? Somebody imports the same thing twice? This is kind of silly. Nobody does that. I've seen it done. Not in the same file like this, per se. I've seen it actually be done in the same file where there happens to just be a lot of imports. So imagine a file where you have 40 imports, and it's just a file to import everything, right? It's not doing anything else. It takes a whole bunch of like components and imports them together into like one style sheet. Somebody doesn't realize it. Their, stacks is already in there, and then they've written it twice. So they end up having double stacks inside of their thing. Sass doesn't complain. CSS doesn't complain. Nothing is going to complain about this. It's just going to work, and you're going to have code bloat, essentially, because there's now a bunch of extra code in here that doesn't need to be rendered or run or anything. It's just going to be compiled and thrown in there. You could fix this using something like PostCSS, where you would potentially look for duplicate code and just delete it. But that's solving the problem, but not the root of the problem. It's just solving it's solving an issue that should be solved somewhere else. It should be in your code base here, where you say, hey, I don't want to have this. Like, I need to remove this from this thing. But if you want to see something that would actually be a little bit more realistic that happens, it's more something like this. So, all right, I think inside of boxes, right? Yeah, so inside of boxes, I have a box setup mixin. Now, let's set up a story for this, so that way we understand the use case in the scenario. I don't like putting all my mixins in the same files that I'm actually working in. I enjoy, like, the way I set up and structure my CSS and my Sass files. I mean, I usually have mixins set aside in a different file. That's just called mixins, and they all kind of live there, or maybe I group them together if I have a whole lot of mixins. So I kind of just put them in one place, and then I can pull them in as I need them. There is a case to be made that if you're writing mixins that are just needed for this file, so this is only supposed to be used inside of box, inside of this CSS for boxes, you could make the case that, well, I'm going to put all the mixins inside of here, and then I don't have to worry about it. Okay. Again, I can see that case being made if you wanted to do that. So fine, we did that here. That is what it is. What I've seen people do, though, is this. So let's go back to here, and right now we have boxes and stacks, right? So that means, because everything is global, I could go into here and I could say at include box setup, and call this like that. So I can say this, that should run correctly. And you'll see that it says stacks, and now it's using the padding from here and dropping in the color from there. So we can see that it's actually using the boxes set up correctly in here. Again, this is a little bit of a problem because you're like, if this is something that is truly supposed to be used in a couple of places, it should be moved to a more global file. But I've seen people say, I just need this mixin in one place, quote unquote, one place that I never need it again. So, or outside of the, I only need it really in this file, but there's this one other place in stacks where I need it. Okay, fine. They end up using it, and that's okay in this position, right? It's working, everything's global, so you're good, right? Unless the order was changed. So if the order is changed and I do this, I'm going to get an error. Box setup isn't included in here. Why? Because stacks is called first and then boxes is called. So the order of operations here is wrong. And when stacks gets called, it doesn't know about this box setup. So maybe there's another reason why you can't change this ordering around right now. So stacks has to stay here for some reason, because maybe, I don't know, it's got some other styles in it that are important for boxes later on or whatever, right? So there's a reason it's in this order. Maybe you're just not allowed to change that file for some reason. Who cares? It's just, there's a reason. Reasons exist. So then what somebody does is say, okay, well, at import boxes. And this happens all the time. They're saying, well, it's just a mixin that I need, and this thing has the mixin in there. Mixins are not code that it's rendered to the screen, or it's rendered in the file. It's just kept in memory and used when it's used, so it's not a big deal, quote unquote, again, not a big deal that I'm importing it again inside of here. But it is a big deal. So while your code works, you are again having boxes up here, boxes now down here. And oh, by the way, if you were dependent on stacks color being globally changed to red, you've now changed it to blue here because you've called boxes a second time inside of there. So you might have another problem inside of here, right? So if you were expecting everything to be red for whatever reason, may not be. May not be what you're actually now expecting. So again, you're changing up the order of things. You're potentially changing colors that you're expecting things to be. You're like, there's a whole bunch of issues with here. So we've imported this thing. We now double import it because we're, it's like this recursive import essentially that we've got going on here. This is a mess. Use solves these problems. Use actually solves a couple of other problems too with this, but let's fix the first problem here that I see let me get rid of all this. Let me go back to where we were before in the beginning. All right, that should be all working. All right, good. Stacks, boxes, great. Okay. So first things first, by changing this over to use, we get rid of one really interesting problem, which is that everything is now namespaced to stacks and boxes. So everything inside of here is now namespaced, and that means this color variable right here is set to just the color variable. It's not going to take any value outside of stacks and boxes. So if we go over to our out statement here real quick, our out CSS, you see stacks is red, boxes is blue, and body is green. So we have what is at the very least more correct, or potentially correct, or at least correct in the eyes of somebody who didn't even know that these imports were importing and changing colors around. I think this is much more in line with what a new person coming into Sass would expect it to be, that this is code that's out there somewhere. I don't need to look around and see and find anything and see if this is global. It's just, I'm using this color variable inside of here and it's fine and it works. So that in and of itself kind of saves us a whole bunch of time, because now I know that I'm defaulting to green. I can change this color around in here. The order of these two things, oops, no longer matters either to my code at the, in the bottom. When I go here, blue, red, green, red, blue, green, it doesn't matter. This is going to be green because it's not using the same variables. It's not using the same namespace as everything else. Now, if I wanted to use that variable out of here, what if I wanted to use this color? What if this is not what I wanted to use here? I could actually do that. I could just say boxes dot, go back and compile, run it again, and now it's blue. So you can also see what it's doing here is that it's quote unquote jumping this color. It's not using this. It's not being over, it's not, color doesn't get overridden here per se. It's just, I'm now using whatever color happens to be set from inside of boxes. I could do the same thing with stacks. If I could spell. Ah, that's nice. So now I have way more control over what variables and values are coming out of, my imported modules in CSS or in Sass. This is so much better. The other problem I was talking about before with the duplication issue, remember if you happen to have something on the same page, if you have like 40 or 50 of these things, you just don't even realize you dump in another stacks somewhere. This is actually, let me clear this, going to give us an error, which is awesome because it's saying, whoa, what is this? It's saying there's already a module with namespace stacks. So Sass internally is saying, okay, I have a use with boxes and a use with stacks. It's namespacing it, all the code inside of it to, like it's setting a namespace variable essentially to itself that says namespace is now boxes for this stuff. Namespace is now stacks for here. And then it sees this one and it says, I already have a namespace named stacks. I can't put this on here. I can't use this. It has to be unique. So it's not going to accept this in here. So hopefully if you saw this error message, or if you've ever seen this error message and you're like, what the hell does this mean? You now know that it's saying, well, okay, there's a module with namespace stacks that already exists, which means I'm copying this code. I'm using this already. I don't need to do this. It doesn't need to be in there. So that's great. That hopefully gets rid of any of your like silly copy paste problems that may happen. But the other thing it also solves is, let's go back into, so we have this thing in boxes right here, and I have stacks over here, and I want to use that thing inside of here. I can still say, I need to say actually now at use boxes. And let's just first take a look at this. It's going to run. It's going to work. It's not doing a double import. There's no multiple, what is that? What is it? It's not dumping all the stacks CSS into that file again. And since it was already called once, it's not going to put it in there again. It's got it. It's good. It doesn't copy and paste that code. So that makes things a lot better, right? Already, we're not going to have this duplication of code in here. And I can still, now I can use this also in here. So let's say I have boxes right there, and I want to use I want to use that function, or the mixin that we have, so box setup. So now I could do this by saying include boxes dot, geez, I forgot the name of it, box setup. All right, hit refresh, go back here, and it's working. So we can see it right there. It's coming into this thing. Great. We're not getting duplicate CSS. We're able to namespace our mixins, our functions, our variables, and use them without worrying about extra code coming into the situation that's might be overriding things or blowing things up. It's nice to be able to do this. Also, if you just see here, I switched the order of these two things around, and it's not going to matter because I've already, I'm pulling this in separately inside of here. So like this boxes is going to get pulled into here. I'm going to be able to use boxes inside of here. It's fine. It doesn't matter. It's going to work because this use statement is up here. And also, and this is important now to also know when you're using this, these are not global. Like use is not global in the same sense that imports were. So if I don't have inside of this stack right here, boxes, even though I've changed the, well, here, let me just change this back. So to that thing up there, if I do this, it still has no idea what this is. These use statements are local to this file. So stacks over here has no idea what boxes dot is. Like it doesn't know this namespace. It can't, there's no module named this that is being used. It just doesn't know. So even though I quote unquote have the right order of things, it's just not going to work. So you have to go into the individual files and say, I want to make sure I'm using specifically this module, the boxes module, and then everything will work. So that does leave, I guess, a little bit of a somewhat annoying thing where if you happen to have a bunch of custom files that you've created, so I have this one here. Let's see if I have anything in here. So this guy up here, anytime you're in a file, you have to import or you have to use all the things you want to use inside of here. So I have my own custom properties thing that I'm pulling in. I want to use some of the Sass inbuilt stuff for lists and strings. Anytime I have this, I have to actually call it again. So I'm using list inside of here. I'm using map inside of here. I'm using list and math and string inside of here. So it's not global anymore. It's global to the file, I guess, if you want to say, like to this entire file. Anything now inside of here can use list or string or math or my custom properties or whatever that is. So changes how it kind of changes your mindset a little bit about how these things work. But once you get into the mindset of this, it does really make things a lot easier. So I now have access to being able to like keep my variable names what I want them to be. I can kind of keep things private, essentially. I can actually keep things truly private if I want to. So if you look inside of my convert, no, I don't think it's here. Where is it? Custom properties, maybe? I don't remember where I have this. Selectors. All right, so in my selectors mixin here that I have a whole bunch of stuff going on. Anything that starts with the underscore is actually private. So I can't call walk selector 2 outside of my selectors.scss file. Even if I import it, it's not going to work. It doesn't work. It's not something that is allowed to be used outside of this. So that's a truly private function that exists inside of there. You can do the same thing with variables too. I think you do have to namespace them with underscores, and then you can't use them outside of the actual file that they were created in. So again, you can have truly private variables, functions, mixins, which is awesome. You can have variables and functions and mixins that are being used in other places that you understand better where they're coming from. Like this is great for theming too. If you have a bunch of colors and you want to set something up like that's called theme, you can now have everything kind of namespaced under theme if you want to. You can also change these names if you need to. So this can, let's say this is boxes, but it comes from some sort of framework that you're using or you built for your company. You can just say as B, or let's say your company is, they make cogs. So, or, Cogswell cogs. We have, as cog boxes. Now, if I were to run this, it's going to say, wait, what's this? Expected identifier. I think I need to, here, let's just do cogs. I think it's like that. Yeah, there we go. So it's saying, wait, we don't have a namespace boxes anymore. What is this? Because I named it cogs. So hit save there, run that, and there we go. So you can use your own. There we go. Just want to see that, show you that it's actually still working. Everything's working the way you expect it to. Great. There's a lot of other things that you can do with use, from setting default variables, like almost as a configuration file that you send into the use statement. I would suggest that you go and take a look at the documentation on the Sass language site. It's got a lot of information on there. It also tells you more about the differences between import and use. I really recommend you read it. It's got a lot of good stuff in there. So that's all for this video. Just wanted to show you import and use. I hope that helped. If you have any questions, hit me up here. I'm happy to answer anything about this on either here in YouTube, or if you found the video somewhere else and I posted it, I'll try to answer those questions there. Have a great rest of your day, folks, and I will talk to you soon.